Morning, everyone. If you want to get settled, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It's 8 o'clock. Thanks to everyone for joining us online. Just going to give it a sec for folks to get settled in the room. All righty. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Grand Rounds. It is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest, Laurel Bristow, today. Laurel joins us from Emory University as the head of audience development for Rollins School of Public Health. She plays a key role in shaping the school's public-facing outreach by identifying emerging themes in public health and science that resonate with diverse audiences. Through a mix of written, visual, and multimedia content, she promotes and strengthens trust in public health information across a variety of media platforms, including the NPR Podcast Network, where you can find her phenomenal podcast, Health Wanted. Laurel's impressive academic background and practical experience make her exceptionally well-suited to this role. She earned her Master of Science in Infectious Disease Control from the prestigious London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Over the years, she has worked as an epidemiologist and research coordinator in public health departments and institutions, focusing on infectious diseases with a special emphasis on tuberculosis. Today, however, Laurel joins us not only as an expert in infectious diseases, but also as a leader in the evolving world of science communication. It's in this context that I first encountered her work during the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic. I was immediately impressed by her ability to synthesize and communicate complex scientific data in a way that was accessible, evidence-based, and importantly, reassuring during an uncertain time. Her updates became a reliable source of information for many, including myself. Since then, she has expanded her focus to cover a broad range of public health topics. Intertwined with more straightforward scientific and health content, you can also enjoy her fun insights like why cruises are terrible and how axolotls are very surprisingly cute. What continually draws me to her content is the way she blends rigorous, data-driven insights with humor and authenticity, showing that it's possible to thrive in academic and scientific spaces without losing your personal voice. I'm excited that today, at least for those in the room, we have a rare opportunity to experience Laurel's engaging work live and in person rather than through our screens. So please join me in offering a very warm welcome to Laurel Bristow as she presents Influenzers, the Rise of Social Media for Science Education.
Thank you for such a nice introduction. Hello, good morning, everybody. My name's Laurel. I am so delighted to be here and to get to talk to you about science communication. University of Madison, Wisconsin has such an impressive group of guests for their Grand Rounds that I had to actually email Catherine and make sure that they knew what I did, because it's going to be a different kind of Grand Rounds, but we've been approved for CMEs anyway. So let's get started. Conflict of interest disclosure, I have none. I like it that way. So it's pretty easy for me. But yeah, the term influencers kind of came up as a joke during the early days of the pandemic with the work that myself and other people were doing. I like to say that I am a professional yapper. Some people could say professional explainer. So our current state of affairs, when you look at where people are getting their news from, it is largely from social media these days, right? And particularly a huge portion of people on Instagram and TikTok, increasingly, that is the sole place where they get the majority of their news, is social media sites. It's also really common in the younger generations to get their news from these places instead of from more traditional news sites or newspapers. So there is really there's a need on these sites that is greater than kind of what is being put out on the sites. Yeah, so there's a huge need on social media for quality information, and unfortunately there is a distinct lack of quality information on social media. So that concludes the database portion of our talk. We are now moving into kind of vibes and personal experience only. So how did we get here? And by here, I mean the portion of just being in a state where we have all of these misinformation, basically, about health and about other things on social media, and people are following them. I call it the perfect storm trifecta. So the first issue is that we, as a society, have spent years of framing science as inaccessible, right? You have tire commercials with scientists in lab coats. You have, confusing chemical names to sell shampoo. This one, it says, our technology powered by patented technology, adaptive F3 bonding complex. What does that mean? I don't know. You don't need to know either. Science is taking care of it. Don't worry. And so we've done this for years and years until people started thinking, actually, I would like to understand what this is. I'm not okay having you just say these terms to me and tell me not to worry about it. So people started having questions. This is happening at a time with the rise of influencer culture. So I always like to say that there are two kinds of influencers. There are influencers that you want to be, whose lifestyles that you want to have. These are things like the Bella Hadids, the Kardashian family. This is a picture of an actual fake interior of a private jet that people can rent so that they can make social media posts pretending that they are flying private jets. And then there are influencers that you want to be friends with. So this, we have the experience of listening to podcasts and thinking of your own stories that would be, or your own jokes that you would tell during these times. So the third issue is individualism, right? So it's hard to feel like the smartest guy in the room when you are agreeing with everyone in it, which makes a perfect environment for contrarians, especially against the scientific consensus, people who have their own ideas about what's actually happening here, and will be very loud. So when you put these guys together, influencer culture and science is inaccessible means that you are turning to people with a trusted perspective so that you can understand what is happening. And that generally comes in the form of somebody who feels like a friend, even if they're not a friend. That's a huge portion of influencer culture. The influencers that you want to be friends with then become people that you trust to tell you what to do. Between influencer culture and individualism, there's monetization, there's attention. You can say incendiary things and you get a lot of attention for it. And like toddlers, any attention is good attention, and some people really feed back on that and keep going. And then between science as inaccessible and individualism, you get contrary opinions, right? It's someone who thinks that they're smarter than people, somebody who can stand out from the crowd by saying something different. And when you have all of this together, in the middle, you of course get the Joe Rogan experience. Whoops, I meant misinformation. So it's become a huge problem, this kind of vortex of misinformation, of people standing out, of people listening to people because they're saying something different, and wanting to feel like you are smarter than everyone. And that can, unfortunately, with influencer culture, make people a ton of money. And so it is really appealing to do that. Also, attention is weirdly a currency that a lot of people want and are happy for, even if they're not necessarily monetizing things. So how did I get here? This is an actual mirror selfie that I took in the bathroom at the Emory Midtown Hospital on March 12th of 2020. I had 600 Instagram followers on my private Instagram account, and I was doing infectious disease epidemiology research in the hospital. We realized on this day that COVID was in the hospital. We stopped all of our studies to try to figure out what was happening. We were studying respiratory diseases, so obviously I couldn't send my team into rooms without having a better idea of what was happening. We didn't have tests yet, it was kind of a mess. So I made this, I said, since I have free time, which is the famous last words, of course, I was wondering if people have any questions, interest in an Instagram story about COVID-19 with some facts. I will not subject you to this if no one cares. Also famous last words. So I made a story on my Instagram stories at home about what it meant to flatten the curve, what a coronavirus was, things that we needed to know, what we were missing. People started asking if I could make my profile public so that they could tell other people to watch the story. I did it. Overnight, I had 500 new followers. I think by the end of the weekend, I had 10,000 new followers. It just kept going and going. People would send me questions. I would come home from the hospital. I would work to answer their questions. There was just such an overwhelming need for information and understanding given to people that was not only factual, but was in a way that they appreciated learning from and having it being accessible and taken into. I think at the peak of it, I was at 450,000 Instagram followers. Yeah, and it just became like this second job that in the moment I was very happy to do, right? Like being useful in a crisis is also a currency that is very important and can motivate you a lot. So I did a lot of that, and people started to take notice. You know, we had a TikTok show. Now this and I partnered. We had a show on TikTok where we were trying to do science-based education weekly. It was an absolute nightmare. I don't recommend partnering with TikTok until they figure some things out. But we tried. We really tried to bring it to the people where they were getting it from, you know, news sources, all this sort of thing. So with this growing thing, I, you know, lucked out. I kind of stumbled into things because I told everyone, you know, my Instagram account is not an infectious disease Instagram account. It is the Instagram account of somebody who studies infectious disease. And for that, I kept putting stuff about my personal life on there the same way. I mean, a little bit more reserved, but the same way that I had been doing. And so that is where I ended up, was the trusted perspective. People told me it felt like a friend was explaining complex infectious disease topics to them. But with that comes the other side, which is you have the influencer culture of being the friend. You're not just the science educator, you're somebody that people want to listen to. So it turned into this thing of like everybody's best friend, or like, you know, your Instagram science influencer best friend. And so that is something that you have to kind of think about when you're approaching, if you want to do science communication, that now there is this kind of sphere where you can, you know, potentially overshare or give too much of yourself, but that also has the trade-off of people trusting you more. So it's a really delicate balance to try to figure out what you are comfortable doing. This is the area I don't want anyone to go into. If you're thinking about becoming, doing more science communication, doing public science communication, you'll notice that this section of the Venn diagram is a lot bigger. There's a lot more options there. It would be easy to fall into that. I would hope that you would go to the trusted perspective side. All right, so the best as I can do practices, these are just lessons learned from what I have been doing on social media for the last almost 5 years at this point. Know your audience. So there really is a media and a venue for everyone, right? I have Jessica Malati Rivera is another science communicator, good friend of mine. She's on Instagram. She is much more, I guess what you would say, professional in her Instagram account. You know, she will occasionally put a few things about her family on there and stuff, but it is like every post on Maine is science related, it's advocacy related. You know, she really keeps like a much more tight-knit kind of public appearance on Instagram. And some people really like that. They really resonate with that. They want to be taught by someone that they feel is, you know, not necessarily above them, but just like highly trained or like very professional or very kind of like more laced up. That's not me. And my audience is fine with that. I think I forgot to mention that when I started this, my Instagram account handle was King Gutter Baby, because I had originally set it up because I specifically did not want anyone that I worked with to ever find my Instagram account. Oops, backfired a little bit. So I got kind of stubborn and I held on to the name for several years. There is a wonderful clip of me making Dr. Sanjay Gupta say the name on his podcast, which I think was worth it. I did eventually end up changing, but you know, if you don't want to be everyone's influencer, best friend, educator, you can also do it from a much more professional kind of standpoint, and people will still respond to that. There's still an audience for that. Dr. Knock is a friend who does science education predominantly on TikTok, and he does TikTok dances. Like, he likes doing the trends and fitting them into science education, people like that. Sam Ghali is still on Twitter. God bless him. I know, ER doctor, but he is great. He puts up x-rays, he'll put up x-rays and he'll say, what is this diagnosis? And give people 24 hours. Engagement, like asking participation, gets people so engaged in science education. It's like really a wonderful tool. And then he'll make a voiceover video explaining what it is, and people just love it. Like, I mean, honestly, if there are any radiology people or residents in here, x-rays, people love x-rays. That is a really great way to get into science education. Caitlin, she does a Substack. So if you don't want to be online, you don't want your voice, you don't want to be recorded, she writes a newsletter. And she has expanded to now starting to have local newsletters for different areas, and is recruiting people who want to write their newsletter for their area. So Your local epidemiologist, if you are somebody who likes to write explanations, she's a great resource, and I would highly recommend that you look into her project to expand your local epidemiologist to actual areas, because I'm sure she's trying to find someone in Madison who wants to do it as well. Dr. Darian, also another friend from Instagram, he did what was called Bus Stop Med School, where literally when he was waiting for the bus stop, he would talk about a case on his Instagram and have people discuss it in the comments. He's now the medical correspondent for Good Morning America. He's another person that really the pandemic picked things up for. And Science Sam was a neuroscientist. She now does like Bill Nye type science experiment education on her local TV station in Toronto. So she's like me, is what I call a generalist now, doing stuff outside of her specialty. So the point is that there's a medium for everybody. I got extremely lucky in that mine was Instagram stories that I recorded just in my kitchen, and it was great for me because there's no comment section on Instagram stories. So every DM or anti-science or hateful thing got sent to my inbox, and that meant no one was fighting in my comments, which was huge for me because I could also just not look at my inbox if I didn't want to see that stuff anymore. So there's a place for everyone if you're interested in doing this work. Humility is a huge important part of science communication. It really is a team sport. It can be tempting, especially in an emergency, to try to take everything on yourself. But building a team of educators and communicators is so important so that you have space to take a break when you need to take a break. Admitting when you're wrong is honestly a joy. Like training your audience that things change and get updated, and sometimes we get things wrong, is not only important for you and yourself to not put this pressure to double down or always be right, but it also helps teach people that science is constantly changing, right? And that is something that I think people have had a really hard time understanding, not only because recommendations change so much, but also why they're changing and trying to keep up with them and still have faith in the scientific process. So it is helpful both for you and for the goal overall. Asking people for help is huge. I mean, especially now, or even my background's in infectious disease. I would very lucky when you work in an institution that has an array of experts. You can ask virologists questions to make sure that you get it right. You can include people and credit people and draw upon the wealth of knowledge, which is really important. Teaching people science changes is like the absolute biggest one, right? You have to be able to say, this is what we said before and this is what we're saying now. I mean, that was a big one with masks when Anthony Fauci said, we don't want people to wear masks, and explaining, well, that's because we don't want limited supply, and now we have better information that masks work, and just teaching people to, to update their expectations for things and that it's okay for stuff to change is huge. Another really important part of this work is that to beat the conspiracy theorist, you have to become one, which is honestly one of my favorite kind of parts of this work, is when you get a message that says, hey, have you heard about this insane sounding thing? Then you get to be a detective and figure out where it comes from. Who is saying it? What paper are they misrepresenting? What bit of news have they taken a headline from and not read the body of? And so I kind of really enjoy that. It also is really important when you yourself are communicating with people, in everything that you put out, that you write, that you talk about, to think about how it could be misconstrued, because people will take any opportunity that they can to twist your words. So learning to be very intentional and clear in your words is like a huge skill. And I think it's, for me, a really fun practice. So all your good deeds, this is David Shringy, all your good deeds will be punished, but still you must do more good deeds. You cannot win. You must continue to try. Honestly, if you are doing science communication in a way that everyone is happy with, you're probably doing it wrong, right? So much of science is political, and so much of what we do is to take a stance for things that maybe make people uncomfortable, right? Especially things for like harm reduction, health equity, health disparities. These are things that we need to talk about, and you're going to make people upset, some people upset. And that's okay. You just have to learn how to let that go. It's has been very illuminating for me to learn to let go of the desire to be liked by everyone or to keep the peace with everyone. So I think that's a really important thing to think about as you're going into this. The horseshoe theory of extremes, do you guys know what this is? which is that, okay, so this is a theory that over time, the ends of extremist spectrums start to resemble each other more than they are different. And this happens a lot in science communication. This is happening really in like the COVID community. So you have people who think COVID doesn't exist, think vaccines are, toxic, they're trying to kill us, it's government control. And now we have people who are like, they're trying to kill us because they're not doing anything about COVID. They're denying, the realities of how serious COVID is airborne AIDS, COVID is this, COVID is that, right? So like you have these two groups that are similar. So I feel, and this is very unofficial, but I feel like when you're kind of moving to homeostasis in an emergent situation is when the two sides are both yelling at you and calling you a shill because of the work that you're doing. So that's what I'm experiencing now, which is interesting, but it's just something to keep in mind is that over time, you will not just be getting the anti-science people, you'll get the, too much science people, inventive science people who are also yelling at you, which is not to discount people who are taking COVID very seriously because it is obviously still a very serious disease, but it's not airborne AIDS. I'm just gonna say that right now for the record. So yeah, count to 10. That's a huge, it's a huge skill that I've had to learn because let me tell you, I love conflict and the internet is a great place for it. And you want to defend your own honor sometimes or defend the science. And you just have to pick your battles because there are some people for whom there's nothing that you can say that's ever going to change their mind. And it might feel cathartic in the moment to, try to take them on, but it's not worth it. The other thing that I really had to learn personally was with this huge platform, people want to debate, right? They want to do a public debate. They don't actually want to debate. They don't want to change their mind. They want access to your audience. So you have to be protective of the information that you give your audience as well, because it might seem like a good idea to, put someone in their place, do whatever. You don't know how they're going to control the media. They can edit stuff to make you look however you want to look. And then also people who are following you who are maybe health hesitant, health skeptical, who have questions, then get exposed to someone that might resonate with them who is giving them the incorrect information. So just remember that you are not obligated to take on these public debates. There's some people who like to do it and more power to them, but you definitely don't have to share your audience with someone who is operating in bad faith. I think that's a really important thing to learn. Another really important thing to learn is self-care. The Queen Mudang does not let anybody push her around. So the biggest things with this, there's a lot of abuse within science communication, within online spaces in general, but particularly right now with the amount of misinformation that is circulating. So you need to look out for yourself. There is such a internal kind of desire sometimes to martyr yourself, for lack of a better word, to keep doing this stuff. You can't help anybody if you're completely burnt out. So have an exit plan is what I say. With my Instagram, I never ever monetized it. It was a very intentional decision for me to not make it my source of income, to not lean on this thing, because I wanted to be able to stop doing it whenever I wanted to do it, if I needed to. I didn't want to have that pressure to keep going. So it's fine to take breaks. It's another part of why we create a team and a system of people who can help us explain stuff so that when you're burnt out and someone asks a question, you can say, actually, I saw that Caitlin answered this on her Substack. Let me send that to you. Or you can repost somebody else's Instagram about explaining it, or whatever you want to do, promoting it from people that you trust and you work with so that you can take a break and not have to cover everything yourself. It's really important. Another really important thing that I learned is steal that bicycle. You've heard the phrase, I asked God for a bike, but that's not how God works. So I stole a bike and asked God for forgiveness. When I started doing this, I was trying to be good. I was trying to behave right and go through Emory Communications about media requests. I was getting CNN, all these magazines and stuff. And they wrote back and very politely said, please don't talk to anybody. We don't know who you are, which is fair. I'm a clinical research coordinator. I'm not a doctor. I'm not on their media team. I haven't done the media training with them. They don't know who I am. So I said, fair. So I just stopped mentioning Emory. It was my work on Instagram is separate. I have this infectious disease background. That's just what I asked everyone to frame me as interviews and stuff. And you work. And then suddenly Emory started sending me media requests because I had proven that I could do the job before I got the job, right? So sometimes you just have to, be able to do these things to prove that you can do these things rather than waiting for someone to give you an opportunity. You have to make it for yourself. And now we have an Emory-sponsored NPR network radio show and podcast that I'm the host of. So it took a long time, but we really got here. And the show is so great and so important because now we get to talk about everything. Our episode that's coming out today is about Emory's Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality. We talk about psychedelics in medicine. We've talked about abortion. We talk about harm reduction, the opioid epidemic, Narcan. Like, we just really get to talk about all of these subjects and bring them to a huge audience. We have listeners in all 50 states and 128 countries. It was helpful. We had this built-in following from the work that I had been doing, but now I'm covering more topics, which brings me to a super important part. Is my background is infectious disease, right? Now I'm covering all of these other topics, and I'm drawing on the wealth of information from Emory experts, and we're going to start expanding to invite experts from other schools and stuff. So I am now going from an infectious disease focus to being a generalist when it comes to science education. And what we really need are generalists. We have researchers who are phenomenal and can talk really well about their particular area of interest, but you need someone to bridge that gap so that you can cover more things and they can be, kind of the center point for teaching people about this stuff. So I do really encourage you. It's great if you want to be a specialist and that's all you want to talk about, but if you are interested in being a generalist and educating people about, more fields, I encourage you to do that. Don't worry about, imposter syndrome. I always tell people, Bill Nye has a bachelor's degree, right? Hank Green, who is like a more modern science explainer, he has a master's degree. He has a master's degree. So there are places for people. You don't have to get hung up on credentialism as long as you are, leaning on experts and crediting those experts and working with people. I think it's a very important area that we're going to need to fill more to make science more accessible for everyone. And the last thing that I just want to say about this too is that, that first slide I said, if anybody wants, the first post I made, I said, if anybody wants facts about COVID, and people said they did, I Googled it. I Googled what it meant to flatten the curve. I was looking up and researching stuff too. It's not like I inherently knew it. Science communication is about your ability to take on a subject and to understand it and then explain it to other people. You don't have to know it inherently. You can do the research to be able to help people with that. So I just really encourage anybody who's interested in this to try it, to see what works for you, what medium you like, what kind of audience you want to talk to. Do you want to be more scientific? Do you want it to be at a higher level? Do you want it to be generalist to the public? Do you want it to be children? Like, there are areas for everyone that I think is worthwhile for people to talk about. So that is my talk. If you have questions about science communication, you can absolutely email me. But if we have questions, we can do questions for a while here. Yeah. Thanks.
That was fantastic. I laughed, I learned, and I found myself nodding my head a lot. Thank you so much. I'm sure we have lots of folks with questions, including already in the back. Sorry, yeah, you, Dr. Stryker, yeah. Yeah, no, you. Oh, sure, I'm sorry, yeah, first time, sorry.
That was great. Thank you. It kind of sounds like at some point you abandoned Twitter. And clearly the platforms that you use is a really important point. So maybe could you talk a little bit more about that? Because, you might invest in a platform and then the platform changes in terms of, their strategy for reaching people and stuff.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I was never really on Twitter because I was a talker. I wasn't a typer. But the decline of Twitter has been incredibly sad for the scientific community. Like, during the early days of COVID, there was just so much information sharing and communication happening so quickly. We found so many experts, so many people to collaborate. So it's been really sad. There are still some people who are hanging on there. But again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about, like, choose your battles. Twitter is at a point where it's like a little bit too abusive for academics a lot of the time. There are still some people who are hanging on there and fighting the good fight. I think it's in decline overall. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to be able to pivot, or like think if the decline of a site is your sign that you're done, right? So people have moved. There's Blue Sky. There's Threads is another one. Nothing has quite established itself as the Twitter replacement for the majority of the population, but people are trying on there, and that's also like a good new frontier too. If you're interested in getting into it, you could carve out a niche on there if you are able to do that. But I think sometimes, social media is not permanent. We're in this flux of like, is TikTok gonna still exist in a couple of months and everything? So it can be hard. I think there are enough social media platforms that are similar to each other that if you want to continue, you can pivot. I mean, YouTube is starting YouTube Shorts too, so that's another big platform to get to. So I think it really there is enough that you could pivot if you want to keep doing it, but also sometimes, like I'm on this podcast now, and I also run Emory's Instagram account that does science education. So I really don't do anything on my own personal one about science education anymore. And I think that's fine. You just have to make sure, that you are functioning well and you're not stressing yourself out too much about where you're spreading yourself too thin.
Thank you so much. We do have an online question. When you talked about monetization, I like your point about not relying on social media for income to allow for a quick exit. How do you balance the amount of work you are doing without compensation while working full time?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I look back on the amount of work that I was doing during the pandemic while being in the hospital for probably 60 to 80 hours a week, I don't know how I did it. I think I was talking last night at dinner about how that was probably deeply unhealthy and was just something to keep the darkness out in like the heaviest COVID days. And I don't think I could do that right now. When things started to calm down, I had a better balance. I explained to people that I was going to do, I had been doing kind of daily stories, and I said, you guys are getting like one a week at most. I can't keep doing this, but I still really enjoyed it. I mean, that's a huge part of it too, is like do it because you enjoy it. And that makes it a lot easier to find time or be interested. I was also lucky because I was doing COVID research. So on the clock, I was reading a lot of these papers anyway. So that made it kind of easier for me. But yeah, I think exactly now, like my full-time job is science communication. So I don't also do it for my free time on my Instagram account. But I think it's just a matter of setting people's expectations for how much you are willing to do and what you're interested in doing. Because I do think if you find that you like it, you will find the time to do it. It's like a hobby that's really incredibly nerdy but helpful. People find time to go train for marathons, so you find time to do science communication if you really like it.
So my question is specifically about the algorithms that drive the social media sites that you're engaging with, be it Instagram, YouTube Shorts. The monetization for these websites is really coming from, like the hyper specificity of the algorithms. So I guess like, has your team and your team done research about like how to drive your own algorithmic engagement to try to like get a larger group of people to listen?
Yeah, we have been working. I mean, it's really an experimentation. They're not super transparent about what it is. We do know that like Instagram, for example, really pushes Reels right now. So even if you want to make explanatory slides and you put them to music, that counts as a Reel, and that will be pushed further than like a static post. I was particularly lucky in that my stuff was shared really organically. Like all of my growth was from people screenshotting what I was doing and saying, you should look at Laurel Bristow's stories right now, like talking about whatever. And so because of that, we kind of have this advantage of organic growth. I think that is really helpful. I mean, obviously you can use the algorithm once you figure out kind of what Instagram or whatever you're using has pivoted to in terms of importance, like pushing video content or, pushing multi-site carousels or whatever they're going to do. But if you're just really good at science communication, then people will share your stuff. And I think that like supersedes the algorithm a lot of the time. But yeah, it is hard. You just kind of have to try a bunch of different things and see what sticks and see what performs the best.
Thanks so much. I haven't heard that bicycle quote before, although I do often, I do often say, better to ask forgiveness than permission.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if you ever got in trouble before you got not in trouble, or if you know of anybody else who has taken that route and
Like
tried
with their institution.
with their institution, yeah.
Let's see. I never got in trouble because I just made sure to keep Emory out of my mouth until they were cool with me, which is like, Emory does not, or your institution doesn't control what you do in your free time, right? So as long as you say, I'm doing this as a representative of me and not of my institution, a lot gets forgiven. I mean, but there definitely have been some people might be aware there was a medical student who was posting a ton on Twitter about stuff that was just completely false information, hurtful information, some racist, sexist information, and he got let go from his medical program. It was kind of a really big deal. So I think as long as you are acting in good faith and factually and independently from your institution, it would be harder to make that case. There are some cases that happen that you hear about in the news of people in their private life being penalized for things. But yeah, I think honestly, it's acting in good faith and trying to use your best judgment about what you do as an individual that can really help you. There was weirdly related but not related is people during the pandemic who were lying about their institutional connections, which is very weird and gets you, you can't get in trouble because the institution doesn't have any power over you because you don't actually go there, right? But it's just very weird. So I think it's much safer as a science communicator, if it's not your official capacity at the university, to make sure that you are saying like, this is me on my own doing this.
That's good questions. Got it.
So this is just a pickup about that. So I'm the vice chair for the Department of Medicine and division chief for general medicine. And what we run into is physicians not wanting to accept that you can't represent your institution without your institution's permission. You can represent yourself,
Yeah.
but wanting, because of the power of the institution, to put that name there.
Yeah.
And then wanting to get to like where you are now, like, your journey is amazing and you are amazing. But you've put all this really intense work into it to get to being recognized by Emory, to having something on NPR. So how am I best as a leader able to communicate with my physicians who work with me that they really cannot do that?
Yeah.
Because they will get into trouble, and they have gotten into really big trouble.
No,
Really
100%.
big trouble.
This is a great point about credentialism, right? Like some people in the public really want to know what your credentials are to do something. They want your institutional affiliation to legitimize you. Some people are leaning on that. I think, appeal to physicians is, well, do you think that you're good enough at this to stand on this without the credentials? Like, do you think you can prove that? You have to talk about University of Madison? That's the only way that you're going to be legitimate? Maybe you should work a little bit harder, because it really is, that really is. It's like, do you not trust your own brain and your own ability to communicate science? You have to lean on University of Madison. Because the crazy thing, like institutions want to be able to say, like, look at these incredible people that we have. They want to claim you. You have to prove that you're claimable first, right? That's like, you get that. And it's funny because you're like, yesterday you told me not to talk to anyone and now you're asking if I can talk to NPR. What happened? But that's just the way it is, right? Institutions are going to protect themselves. And so I think it really means a lot, just explaining that it means a lot. Like, your legitimacy should be based on your ability to explain something and not your connection to the University of Madison. And once you prove you can do that, then University of Madison will be happy to, uplift the work that you are doing. But yeah, prove you can do it, buddy.
Facial expressions and the explanation really added to that as well as perfect.
Yeah, I have a Muppet face that I can't control. So I'm glad I'm on radio.
Hi, thanks for an excellent talk. I have two questions. One, I'm a general internist and I'm never going to be a social influencer, just not my personality.
That's fine.
But every day in clinic, patients come and say, I heard this on TikTok, I heard this on Instagram. And I'm like, well, that's wrong.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, why would doctors say that then, right? And who can I trust? Do I trust you or do I trust someone, that has 1 million followers? So how, without drawing that Venn diagram
Yeah.
in a very short visit, how do you get patients to trust you versus social media? So that's my first question.
Yeah.
Second question is, what role do licensing boards, what role are they playing? What role should they be playing in policing physicians who are spreading misinformation?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so to your first question, your advantage is that you are talking to them. You're in front of them, right? This is someone that they feel they have a parasocial relationship with through social media, but you are there and you can explain things. I think people who are guilty of spreading a ton of misinformation, they rely on omissions, right? They twist a paper, they don't talk about the whole truth of something. So you're there and you can fill out a complete picture for them, which I think does a huge amount. The reason that a lot of people, and this is just me getting on a soapbox real quick, is obviously we all understand that the American medical system is not set up in a way that doctors get enough time with their patients, right? So people are trying to fill in that care and that feeling of connection in any way they can, and social media is having it. So I think it's just really important to hear people too when you're talking to them. A lot of the time, people who are on the end of the spectrum, it doesn't matter what you're going to say, but there are so many more people who are just hesitant, who are confused, who want to understand, and just being able to hear their concerns without outright dismissing the misinformation that they're repeating is so important. And I think it does a huge amount to help people with that, just because you're in front of them. As far as licensing boards, yeah, I think that's a really contentious kind of topic right now in medical ethics. I do think there is, a duty, if you are licensed to do something, that there is an agreement and an understanding that you will be acting in good faith and doing it based off of, available evidence. I think there are some, science is about questioning things. We're constantly questioning things and reevaluating things, and that's fine. But there are the people that are making statements without evidence that need to be examined more. If you want to say, like, I want to look into this thing, I am trying this stuff, it's stuff without versus people who are just making broad statements. I think that is an area that I think it's perfectly legitimate for medical licensing boards to investigate and see kind of, especially conflict of interest. What is your motivation? What are you getting out of this? That kind of stuff. We want people to question stuff and push back and make sure that we are giving people the most correct and most the best available information that we can. And questioning stuff is a part of that. But I think it's become apparent that there are a lot of people who are not acting in good faith in that. So.
Fantastic questions. Keep them coming. We have one that came online and then another one as well. Can you please talk a little bit more about how you walk the line between accessible science explanations and not dumbing the content down too much to lose nuance?
Yes. So feedback that I have gotten in the way that I explain things is that people really like that I don't dumb things down too much. It's just about explaining. You can use large scientific terms as long as you explain what those mean. People respond really well to analogies, just finding tricks. But people, I think, especially in this kind of season of misinformation, people enjoy the scientific terms and understanding what the scientific terms mean, not only because it makes them feel smarter, but they like to be able to use it when they are conveying this to other people that they are talking to. So I think it's just really a matter of explaining the terminology to people. You can use the terminology, you just have to take the extra time to explain it, and people really do appreciate it because it is part of that thing of science is inaccessible. It's like, I believe in your capacity to understand this complex thing, so I'm going to explain it to you, and then I'm going to be open if I didn't do a good job explaining it and somebody has more feedback or they need me to re-explain something better. But I do think it is really important to talk to people like they are smart enough to understand what you're saying, basically.
We have another online question. Oops. When you were still using your personal account, did you have issues with parasocial bonding and how did you deal with that? Or maybe more, how did you deal with trolling? You mentioned in your talk not engaging with it or getting the last word, but I presume you had private messages as well that were difficult to read.
Yes. Yeah, so it goes both ways. For the trolls, I used to just really, I mean, I had a lot of rage during the early days of the pandemic for a lot of reasons. And so that was my outlet, was I fought with people a ton. And I loved it. And it was not healthy for me at all, probably, to do that. Now that I am an official representative of Emory University, I've cut that out quite a bit because it really isn't worth it, right? Like, I don't need someone to come for the institution. It just seems like more of a headache. And thankfully, people have really calmed down. I think a lot of the like kind of troll anti-vaxxer, anti-science people realized that I was not going away and they lost interest, which is great. But yeah, I think for the trolls, you do just have to, there was a time where I just stopped looking at my DMs because it got too much and was really hard on my mental health to do all this work and to still have these people say stuff like that in my DMs. The parasocial relationship is very real. It is also something that I've had to, like, the positive parasocial relationship is also real and something that I've had to really do a lot of work to understand, because it can feel very kind of like crazy to have people who you know, treat you like they know you when they don't know you at all. And I think it was hard for me because COVID was so isolating to suddenly have all of these people act like they know me when really I've just been doing all this work for them. So it is something that I have had to like do a lot of internal work on understanding. But you just have to remember that like the positive parasocial relationship, if you get to this point, is because people like love you and they connect with you and they they really enjoy what you do. And sometimes people get too excited and they overstep their bounds. It's like I'm deeply sympathetic to Chapel Rowan and what she's going through right now with her fans and stuff, because I like on a very small scale, I get it. So it's just holding on to understanding that like people are connected to you because they really like you. They like the work that you're doing, and that is the point. We want people to appreciate and understand this work. So I think it's just a matter of trying to remain sympathetic and also remember that there is distance, and it's fine to have distance from that. I will also say, if you follow influencers, be careful, because I have absolutely terrified some people in my DMs before, because if you're sending a message that you think is sarcastic and funny, it just sounds like what trolls are saying, because I don't know you. So I have yelled at some people who were just trying to make jokes before, and then we both have to be like, whoops, sorry, too far.
Sometimes you nominate them for grand rounds and then they come and talk at your institution too. So, you know.
Yeah, it's great. I would say majority, it's wonderful. It's a weird space to be in to experience it. So that's people who what is parasocial relationship? It's people who follow me online and feel like I'm their friend and I don't know who they are, right? So it's like a friendship that is kind of one-sided just because I can't possibly know everybody who follows me. And so people feeling like they have this closeness to me when I don't have the same in return. Yeah.
Such an interesting talk. Thank you. What is your experience with YouTube science communicators? I feel like in this era of like the short snippets of TikTok, Reels, et cetera, like it's hard to get people to sit down for longer content.
Yeah.
Do you know of those who do that? Or do you know of like a way for people to do that longer form content and still have people engage the whole time?
There is absolutely a market for it. It is wild. There are some science communicators. I can't remember what his actual name is, because that's what happens when you're in online spaces, but I think it's called Debunk the Funk. His YouTube, he does like long form takedowns of science misinformation, and people love it. I mean, there are people who they would be happy to watch a 2-hour video as long as it's like ripping some science misinformation to shreds. I have other friends who are, you know, gynecologists who do longer videos, 10-minute videos about, you know, the truth about hormone replacement therapy for menopause, like stuff like that. There is absolutely a market on YouTube. I've never done it because I don't want to like edit videos and do the like weird YouTube thumbnails where you're like, you know, to like get people to play all the games. But I mean, also between you, me, and everybody on Zoom, if I could go back in time, the passive income from YouTube ads, I have physician friends who say that they've made more off of YouTube than they do as doctors. It's kind of insane if you can hit that market. But yeah, the point is there's absolutely a market for it and people like love it. You just have to be also someone who wants to invest in camera equipment and spend the time editing and that stuff. So it's no small feat. But if you are someone who likes to do really wordy explanations or wants to do really deep dives on stuff, there's absolutely a market for that, 100%.
I want to shift this a little bit, and feel free to say, you don't have an opinion on this, which I would find hard to believe. We are really working in general medicine on hiring Black and brown physicians to come and work with us. It's a big priority for us. It's been very hard for us. And so, we're starting to think about how do we move into a social media platform, like what platform? How do we have people look at us in a different way than they do right now? So, what's your comment on using social media, not Facebook, for recruitment and tips and tricks and anything you have to say about that?
Yeah, the recruitment aspect is tricky. I would say we're in this at Emory too. We have an Instagram account that is the one that I run that does like science education, that helps people know that we're a notable source for science education. And then we also have an Instagram account that's more like student life account. We're also starting to encourage our departments, our individual departments, to have Instagram accounts. And I think like that kind of stuff is really useful for recruiting, to show, like if I was a prospective student, I'm going to look on social media for my school's like presence and see what they're doing, because that's just the first easiest place that you look, right, aside from their website. So having social media to promote the culture, like, is really important. It's really important to me on our Emory that we always post, for Pride, that we post for Trans Day of Visibility, that we post for Black History Month, that we talk about, health inequity, so that people can really see what our university stands for. Equity is a huge part of Rollins' like 5-year strategic plan. So I think it is important, and you can show both the culture of your school through that, and also like the kind of cool stuff that you're doing. The research that you're doing, if you can find a social media person who can promote it in interesting ways, people really like that and can respond to that. So I think that's a huge one. Sorry, what was the second half of your question? Oh. Yeah, I mean, you can boost content on Instagram. We have been playing around with like boosting some of our posts to see if it can, really makes a difference in terms of who is finding us and following us, for marketing and everything. I think the platform you want to be on, you have to kind of see the vibe of the platform. Like TikTok, the stuff that works well on TikTok is stuff that follows TikTok trends. So we have just started a TikTok, and that's the area where I'm like kind of proposing we be a little bit goofier in what we're doing. Because also like a school with a sense of humor is also important to some people. Some people want something that's very serious, but you can find, I think, Yale has gotten on TikTok. They've been kind of the most active school of public health on TikTok that I've seen. And they've done a pretty good job. Hopkins, I think, really invests in like video stuff too for Instagram and TikTok, and it works really well. So you just kind of have to figure out like what you are interested in doing. I think Instagram is obviously a huge platform, and it's one of the easiest ones to like do like straightforward science communication without having to do like all the gimmicks or try to know what trends are, or try to, which can also obviously backfire really poorly. But I think I would definitely start with Instagram. I think it's kind of the most accessible. It has a ton of users, and you can have the most success without having to worry about like, really needing a Gen Z person on staff who understands the like mind rot that is happening on TikTok. I say that lovingly because I'm on TikTok, but it is like the trends sometimes you're just like, where does this come from? Yeah.
I give folks time to think. Do you have any, or what's your experience been navigating what might be considered by some or a large institution as a more risky or contentious topic? And if you're kind of face of the institution, like harm reduction practices, have you had any experience having to navigate that? And how do you advocate for topics that you feel strongly about?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very lucky. The School of Public Health, we have a wonderful dean who is very committed to public health topics, but we're part of a larger university, so it's not without politics. So especially things like abortion in the South, we have a reproductive research center for the Southeast, and still you have to be careful when you're talking about it. Georgia just did a double Uno reverse on their 6-week abortion ban, and so at the same time that we did our reproductive rights episode. So just trying to be really careful, because you want to balance our relationship with the state, which gives us access to state data and demographics about reproductive care, and also, being factual and being true to what the issues are. So it is kind of a delicate dance, but I really appreciate our administration kind of has a really good sense of what we can pull back on and what we're like absolutely going to fight for. So I think that's one of those things where it does make a huge difference, like who is the head of your school, who is going to, and if they're going to advocate for you and the stuff that really is like science-based.
So this is more a question about, I guess, your own safety and security when you're making this kind of content. I've seen, a lot of the people who are making this content are often like underrepresented minority physicians or people in research. And there's that sort of extra toxicity that comes with your audience engaging with that. And especially in this world of like doxing and credible threats that people are making on social media. I guess, how do you promote your own safety, or how would you recommend that people promote their own safety when they try to make this content?
Yeah, I mean, if you're publicly attached to an institution, the institution should obviously support your safety. That's like the big one. If you're doing stuff on your own, when I first started, I took steps like I never recorded where you could see out of a window of my house, so nobody could know where I lived. There's a service called Delete Me that you pay, and it removes your address from those like sites where people can pay to look up your address. If you're doing social stuff that's out and about in the real world, I never post about it until I'm done doing it. These kind of things. At this point, I'm not too terribly concerned about my personal safety. Early on, it was much more of a concern because it was a very contentious time and people had a lot of free time during the pandemic. So I was like, I just don't want to worry about that. But there are little steps that you can take like that. I have other big influencer friends who said they got a home security system, and you never talk about what home security system that you have because apparently they're hackable, which is great. So little things like that to just like, mostly it makes me feel better. Like if somebody really wanted to find me, they could find me, which is why I stand 10 toes down on everything I say, because I'm like, okay. But if they want to find me, they can find me. So it's little things that make me feel better. I also once at one point did a series of stories about my personal boundaries for the way people talk to me in my DMs and stuff. And obviously, like, some people will listen, some people will not, but that just being able to put it out in the world made me feel so much better. It was such like an emotional relief for me to say, like, I do not like when you send me DMs like this. If you're gonna DM me, do it like, that kind of stuff. So I think there are definitely like tangible steps that you can take. And then also if you get to a point where you're really working with the university needs to also be invested in your safety. Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Laura Zakowski, the Vice Chair for Education, and I want to thank you for such an interesting discussion today. And I want to let the entire audience know that the Educator Academy is sponsoring a little further discussion in the room just down the hall, G5114, that starts at 9 o'clock. A little bit of food there and also further discussion. My one question is about, if you're thinking about distilling science down to something very straightforward, which is what you're doing. I'm curious what sources you use so that you do not have to read the entire literature that exists to decide what you're going to say. So just for an idea of what's a simple, easy way that we can maybe inform our patients, go here, other than going to Health Wanted, because that'll be the first place, but other sources.
Yeah, that's a great question, because that is something, especially being outside of my field of study right now, is like reminding myself I don't have to do like a PhD dissertation for every episode. I just have to make sure that what I'm saying is correct. So, I mean, there are a lot of universities, I could draw on other universities' kind of news centers for topics, especially if like Emory doesn't have an expert on that. So I think those are really credible sources to look at, like Harvard, Hopkins, Yale. They'll put out articles about a subject. I think that's super helpful. Also because they cite stuff, so you can find their primary sources and read stuff like that. It was, as far as work goes, early in the pandemic, it was a lot easier because most of the time it was like, this study said that mRNA vaccines are gonna turn us into G5 towers and stuff. And so you just like read that one study and you're like, okay, well, here's why this study is absolutely horrible. So that's a little bit easier. But yeah, being a generalist, that's a really good question. I think I start with like, I like to listen to a lot of podcasts too. There are a lot of good science podcasts out there that are, accessible to people. So you can do those. And then everyone who cites their sources, just drawing on that. And then of course, just making sure that you know, credit when you draw really heavily upon somebody else's work is really important. But I would say like the easiest place is university news centers. They do a lot of good stuff representing, you know, because then you get the authors of the papers who are explaining it themselves, which makes it a lot easier.
Thank you so much, everyone in person, online. This was fantastic. I'm excited for anyone who is able to keep the conversation going next door. And thank you again to Laurel for coming and presenting and spending time with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.